Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about Malazan things, because I started Blood and Bone, and this is what we're going to do today. We are going to talk about the first two chapters and the prologue of Blood and Bone, fifth novel of the Malazan Empire by Ian Cameron Esslemont. So almost, the last one of the Malazan books that I'm going to talk about, because until I get access to the Boschla Cobalt Brooch novellas, those are kind of closed to me. But here we are right now. I hope I'll get to finish the entirety of Blood and Bone until the end of next week. That should ideally work out, unless, crazy shit happens, which never does in my life, as you know. As you can also hear, my voice is still not fully back from the dead. I hope that will change by tomorrow. But until then, please bear with me while I sound a bit hoarse. Which, happens. Anyway, let's get this started. Alright, I don't have one of the cool beers right now because my shop up here on the Lonely Mountain is out of cool beers, and I didn't want to drag, I found out too late today, and I didn't want to drag a whole box from down in the city up here. So for now, you'll have to live with me not having really cool beer openings. So until then, we're going to drink this one, which is, I assume, cheap Czech Pilsner for really little money. So, nothing wrong with that. I do actually like that kind of stuff. Alright, let's get started, right? Well, cheers. Pretty good. Alright. Blood and Bone is the fifth novel of the Malazan Empire. When it comes to timeline, it's a bit difficult to say, because this seems to at least start in parallel to, or take place at the same time as Orbsept the Throne, or maybe even Stonewielder, because we have indications that people are still looking for our favorite group of, are still looking for Iron Bars and have not yet returned from there. Now, that's as rough as it can get right now when it comes to, these kind of things. It has to happen after Toll the Hounds, however. So that's sort of where we can all put it in timeline-wise. And I know there's people out there who know more about that shit, but I don't go on Reddit. I don't spend my time in the wiki. I don't do all of the research because I'm a lazy motherfucker. So I just guess from the stuff that I can remember right now. Anyway, not the point that we're here to talk about. So let's look at those first three chapters, if we count the prologue as a chapter, shall we? And, well, it's made pretty clear from the start, right from the start, where we'll spend our time this time around. We'll spend it on the continent of Jakaruku. So yeah, we kind of know that it has to take place at the end of Stonewielder, because if you remember, Stonewielder ends with our buddies Skinner, Mara, and friends stealing something from that tower, and now they're in Jakaruku. We also know that everyone's favorite High King, Galor, was in Daruzhistan at the end of Toll the Hounds, and we see him and a new group of raiders that he has apparently picked up somewhere go, land on the continent of Jakaruku at the beginning of this book. So that's sort of our hints that we have. So, somewhere at the same time of Orbsept the Throne, or roughly thereafter, I guess. Which will also lead, we'll find out the rest of it. We're also back with Crimson Guard people, which we haven't met in Orbsept the Throne, and only had a few in Stonewielder. This time we're back with Shimmer, who apparently is no longer Napan, which, makes a lot of sense that she's once again from Itkokan. Although that means she's no longer blue-skinned. Well, things happen here. And Kaz, Prince Kaz, those are people that we've met before, although we didn't see that much of Kaz, and we get a bit more Kaz this time around. And a bunch of new characters that we have never met before. All right, there's also obviously Lady Spite, who is also coming to Jacuroku to do whatever she wants to do there. We will find out in the future. Who also was in Daruzhistan at the end of Toll the Hound. So that's sort of like how we can guess when this will be. The scimitar, which whatever it is, may, that green thing in the sky that we may remember from the Crippled God is still in the sky. So there's that, I guess. So yeah, there we are roughly. Now let's look at what happens in this book and how it's set up. And one thing that is like really important from the beginning is we were really focusing on Jacuroku. And probably more than most other books in the overarching Malazan book universe, this book is about place. I mean, technically, Orbsep the Throne and Toll the Hounds are also very much about the location of Daruzhistan. But I think the sense of place is even more important in this one. I mean, yes, Stonewater is also more or less all about Corel and Fist. But those places feel very, very, generic. Like there it's more like a people thing. Corel is different or unique because of its culture, its church, the religion of the lady, and all of that stuff. Jacuroku is a jungle continent. At least large parts of it are jungle. And this is the first time we really get into jungle compared to all the other Malazan books, because there's no real jungle in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I mean, there's forests and shit, but we never get far enough into like really warm climates that are still not super fucking dry. So that's sort of like our first like real jungle. And oh boy, is this jungle real. We'll get even more of the jungle realness there, but I'm just saying this is very much about jungles. Now, if we talk about jungles, obviously one thing that we learn really soon is, like, if we, I don't know about you, but if you like think about jungles, there's images that come into our heads. And literature that we may or may have not read, or movies that we may or may not have watched, that are very jungle focused. Like obviously the first one that comes to at least to mind with me is Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which was later then turned into Apocalypse Now, the movie, which is a very much also a jungle book. In a way. Well, there's obviously also that one, and but that has like a different focus. But one thing that I feel is important when we talk about jungles in general is almost more than, like, at least from like a Western perspective, almost more than the classical Orientalism and all that shit that we have as results of colonialism and so forth today. Jungles are even more strange or alien or other to us than those over-romanticized, cliched depictions of the Near and Middle East and all that stuff. Like literal jungles are something that we tend to think as almost alien in our day and age. So having setting a book there is an important thing, and also is a choice that makes it very difficult, like, to actually get that jungle right and get that and not have that feeling of alienness be the only thing, the feeling of otherness be the only thing, unless that is, exactly your kind of goal with your novel, is difficult for someone who is not from that place. Now, luckily, we know that Cam Esslemont spent a lot of time in those areas. So there's that. And one technique that we have right from the beginning here, and that's an important aspect compared to stuff like Heart of Darkness, is that we have a story that at least one part of the story is told from people living in that jungle. That is the story of Xi'an from that empire of the thaumaturgs, the magicians, the alchemists, those bastards, and that's our opening scene. We, and that is important, and it's difficult to do that, I assume, or difficult to make that in a respectful way without falling into all the possible cliches of how to describe a culture. And I know you go back and read a lot of like adventure literature and shit like that that is set in jungles. Like you want to go the whole racist route, you go and read your Solomon Kane stories, which are horrible in that regard. They're still amazing adventure stories, but you have to have a strong stomach to read Solomon Kane marching through the jungles of Africa. Well, that's just one of those things that we'll see like themes pop up here in a way, because it is so easy to portray people living in a more primitive condition as savages or what have you, and it's like clear from the start that this is not the case. It's like those are just people just like everyone else. So it's one of the themes that we'll come back to again and again, is like how living in a specific environment makes your culture in a specific way. You live in a jungle, you will not have like you live in a jungle, your culture in general will be different from people living on the plains. You probably not spend your time riding horses and shit because there's trees in the way most of the time. But that's just like one thing that we'll talk about later on. Another aspect that I feel is important, and a theme that is already raised here, that I personally appreciate being raised here, is a search for that mystical, powerful city in the middle of the jungle. Now, if that screams El Dorado to you, that's a possibility. And probably a good choice. Now, the problem there is obviously, once again, the idea that you have external people, that you have colonizers, imperialists, march into a place to take out its, riches and whatnot, which is exactly what your like Spanish, Portuguese, and what have you adventurers tried to do with South America at the time. Now, in this case, we can assume that the Crimson Guard, like at least the disavowed around Skinner, are the people that are doing exactly that. They're marching in there to get, whatever it is they really want to get, to take it out. And you do that with a feeling of intense superiority or divine right or what have you. And with Skinner, it's hard to say so far because we haven't seen that much of Skinner's perspective yet, but it very much feels like he certainly has that, like, I'm stronger than anyone else, like a might is right kind of approach to the whole thing. And just like in, like, the way we did this shit as Westerners when we did it to, say, people in the Americas, he has struck up an alliance with another empire that is part of that jungle to, use them to help him get into the jungle. Now, those people obviously think that they are the ones in charge and Skinner is helping them out and they're the allies, but we kind of know where the whole thing will be going, right? I guess so. So we have that approach, like, which are two, like, of the jungle story, at least two of the jungle stories, or jungle stories from like history and literature. That one being the more like Africa-based travel up the river to find someone insane who needs to be killed or retrieved or what have you, whether it's your Colonel Kurtz or your Skinner, which is the trope that Kaz and Shimmer are on, and they are already on their way up a river at the end of book one, the end of chapter 2. So there's that, including all the warnings and craziness on the scary horror picture imagery that you have there. I mean, this is also going to be survival horror and nature horror, obviously. And we have the Conquistador kind of story, which is Skinner's band going up there with the thaumaturgs. So those will be like images from our world, from our history, from our literary history, art, and so forth, that will, resonate with this, and that we will see how Cam Esslemont will deal with in the future, in the following chapters, how those ideas. And I feel like the Heart of Darkness Apocalypse Now One is a story that has at this point become very much large in our public consciousness. Like, even people that have not watched the movie or read the book will recognize parts of the theme or know the broader story, just as the whole idea of searching for a hidden city in the jungle, whether it's your El Dorado or your Fountain of Youth or what have you. Also, that one is deeply ingrained in at least Western history and in a lot of Western minds, in a way. It has been used and reused a lot of times. So bringing a bit more of an anthropological background to the whole thing seems like a really cool approach, and it's something that we'll see a lot of in this book in the next couple of chapters, I feel. Now let's look a bit at other parts of what happens so far, themes and interesting aspects. That being the Calor storyline. Now, he's not named Calor yet, but how many people with grey hair, a lot of arrogance, and a long bastard sword and knee-length grey and rusty chainmail have you met in the Malazan world? Yeah, right. It is Calor, of course, and we see him trying to unite a lot of tribes there. What kind of tribes they are? It's the Malazan world. It's very different. You should not make comparisons to real world people here, but we certainly see that those have a sort of feudal system or whatever. Horses, the whole lot. Different tribes, however, with tribal enmities. And this is once again a pattern that we have seen in our history, in our world a lot. You have these different rivalries between all these tribes, and sometimes if you manage, if in some way those tribes manage to overcome those problems, whether it is because they're unified through an external war leader or whatever, or something else, they start the raid of all raids into their sort of civilized countries, which once again brings that whole question of what is civilized? What do you call civilized, or what you call civilization in these kind of terms? Now, obviously, the thaumaturgs have magical power and seem to have at least developed some sort of science of life and death. They do really crazy shit in pretty fucking brutal ways, and they also very much oppress their people. It's something we learned there. It's once again, a very specific, highly, stratified society that we're seeing there, and that's another part of this story is their expedition into the deepest, darkest jungle of Ardata, at the side of the Crimson, the Disavowed, displaying all the drawbacks of that sort of society, which is total lack of understanding of how to run a successful military operation, because they're not a military power, and they try to run their military just like their bureaucracy, which leads to a lot of problems. And that's one of those things that we've seen before in the Malazan world, right? That an actual professional army of professional soldiers that are trained and paid, a standing army, is always superior in the field to an army of impressed soldiers, of impressed peasants. That's just something that we've learned before, for all kinds of reasons. One of them is obviously training. Another one is that soldiers that are there by their more or less own free will tend to actually want to do their job, whereas people that are just there because of force will probably not do the same thing, which is, doesn't only go for soldiers, but especially there. There's all kinds of other aspects to that we'll see over the next couple of chapters, 15 chapters. I think there's like 14 more chapters going on here. So yeah, it's one of those things that we'll see more of in the future. So far, we've mostly seen the incompetence, or not yet even the incompetence, but like the lack of understanding of how to run an army from their commander, which, we'll see where all of that goes. It's still like early days. Same as we see all these tribal rivalries in the camp of Calor's army, with like one or two people trying to overcome them. One of them being Jetal. Is that his name? I think one of like a viewpoint character in that group, the least of lesser princes of still the most powerful house. And this obviously once again brings us to like an important aspect here, that being the aspect of tradition holding back things, and the question of change and what is change. And we have that whole quote of Prince Kaaz when it's like, it feels like we're living in an age of change, but maybe it feels to everyone that they're living in an age of change because progress is a continuous thing. And that is obviously the case. Like, look at us. We feel like the world has been changing rapidly over the last years, or right now is moving and changing super fast. But if you think back, I'm pretty sure our parents felt the same way, to say nothing of our grandparents, right? We always live in these times, and people that are relying very much on their traditions, and this is something that we've spoken about before in the Malazan world, that are holding on to traditions too hard and are unwilling to change, will very much suffer from that fact at some point or another, when other groups around them that are embracing certain aspects of change, at least, will just swallow them. Because overall change, I don't want to call it progress, but overall change is extremely powerful, has a lot of inertia. It's very difficult to stop that it's impossible to stop that over a really long term. So there is that. Another thing that I feel is important for the whole like setup of this place is that Jacuruku has been very much isolated. So a lot of the stuff that has been going on there for the last centuries, if not millennia, has worked out in this like very tradition-bound equilibrium between different kinds of powers and so forth. And what we have now is an external agent, or several external agents showing up. One of those external agents obviously being the Crimson Guard, or more or less the Disavowed. Another one being Calor and his Raiders gang. Those are external agents that meddle in the local affairs and bring those changes in force in very, mostly brutal ways to the place. But once again, we're returning to the whole idea of the jungle being its own thing. And Cam Esslemont is clever here, and I very much approve of the choice he makes there, with having the center of the jungle being Ardata's realm and being half a different warren. We find a way to actually have all the otherness, all the alienness, all the strangeness, and all the danger of the jungle without, with an actual good explanation, which is that it is influenced by one specific, goddess in this case. And this is where the horror theme comes in more and more, because her dreams or nightmares or whatever you want to call it have warped the place even more. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like jungle is scary enough right now, but adding like monsters to it, like the one that we meet early on when Skinner and Mara and so forth kill it, just makes it even more like horror and dark and whatever. And yeah, that makes a lot. That makes it, I feel, interesting in a like even more twisted way, which once again comes back a bit to stuff like Heart of Darkness, where the whole trip up the river to Colonel Kurtz's. I think it's also Kurtz in the original one. Heart of Darkness. It's been a while since I read it, but where that also feels like moving into a different world. So having that feeling without just having it like the drift into a different culture, but actually into like another realm or something that is at least like where different realms overlap is, well, is an interesting way to deal with that feeling, to keep that motif of like moving into like an alien world without making it all about like the colonialism that you can see in stuff like Joseph Conrad. So yeah, what else is interesting? I mean, I like the fact that once again we have a group of Marines because, as we all know at this point, Marine banter or like Malazan soldier banter is the one thing that should be in each and every single Malazan book, because it's kind of what what we like. So having that crew with Spite is interesting. Figuring out what Spite wants is a really it is terrifying, because we kind of figure out at the end of chapter 2, and that is that we learn what the dolmens of Tian are, and they're this one of the locations of a chaining, and we kind of finally figure out how chainings sort of work. I mean, we already knew that there were like lots of chainings over history, but what that means is that like at each, that those are different locations, not just the same place. Every time the crippled god breaks free, you chain him down again. It's like every time you discover a larger part of the body, or like a fragment of the shattered god, that's when it gets chained down. And the dolmens are one of those places where apparently a fragment of the substance of the crippled god has been chained down, and Lady Spite wants that. Now, is she working for the crippled god or just for herself? We don't know yet, at least not in the book. Students of Lady Spite's or Lady Envy's personality might make a shrewd guess where this will be going, but so far we kind of only know that Skinner has become king of High House, of the House of Chains. And there's two interesting aspects here, apparently. I mean, one of them is that he at least pretends to be on a mission, or still working for the crippled god. They need to do something in the jungle. We have that short interaction with Mara and a servant of the crippled god there. But the other one is also that at some point when Skinner's sword is mentioned, it is mottled. Now, how many like weirdly, strangely mottled swords do you remember? Well, I mean, that seems to be one of those trademarks. Now, obviously, we'll see where all of that will be going in the future. I find it interesting to actually finally get Mara as a viewpoint character, because we kind of got her in the first book of. I mean, Mara is in Path to Ascendancy, and we only get her through usually Silk's eyes, I guess, and she's always arrogant and all of that, but we kind of see her now, well, not to put it, well, she's still arrogant and still looking for power and so forth, but we kind of see how a lot of that is maybe because of, societal pressure. We kind of see that situation that, like, she feels that she's often overlooked because of her gender, stuff like that. So we get a bit more of a perspective of Mara, but where that will lead is something that we'll find out in the future, I guess, in the next couple of chapters. While everyone is running into the same place in the jungle, and nothing good ever happens in the center of a jungle. We can already guess that much, right? Um, so I feel like the last bit that is worth talking about, the last bit that we should definitely talk about, is Osiric, who leaves Shadow Throne's place, where we last saw him at the end, or like near the end of Return of the Crimson Guard, and wanders through the Azoth to a stare-down contest with, well, with Gothos in the Dead House in Malaz Island. And won't that be fun when it actually, yeah, I mean, yeah. I personally just always love when Gothos shows up somewhere and just it is cool. It's also, I think, the first time Esslemont mentions Gothos and also makes a connection to Gothos being the Lord of Hate. So there's that connection that we then also learn in the Corcanas trilogy. So once again, one of those like connections to other bits and pieces of the Malazan world. Right, what else is important in those few first two chapters? Probably a lot that I just overlooked, but you know, I'm not paid for my thinking and I'm not exactly a smart person, so maybe I forgot a lot. Anyway, I feel Blood and Bone is one of my favorite ones, and we'll see how I feel when I'm finishing it this time round. I hope you're still with me. Thank you for watching. Please like, please subscribe, do all the things. I'll talk to you tomorrow about the next two chapters, I think. And until then, cheers.